out on the east side of the county. Better democracy, I mean, I think a lot of it's already been stated, but accessibility and a feeling that for folks, if they actually are active and participate, that it makes a difference. So that's what matters to me. And with that, I will send that over to Roxana.
Hi everyone, my name is Roxana. I also go by Roxy. I use she, her pronouns. I live right in the middle of downtown Portland. A better democracy for me means the introduction of transparency across all fronts, including fiscal transparency. And also, I do hope that given the current climate, that there will be more of a participation with people within the local government here in Portland. Sorry, I have to popcorn. Popcorn to Beth.
Hey everyone, my name is Beth Shvilchuk. I use they, them pronouns. I live in Northeast Portland, just in Hollywood District. And yeah, I don't really have much to add other than what y'all said. I think a more accessible democracy is essential, especially one that minimizes paperplay. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Becca.
Thanks, Beth. Good morning, everyone. My name is Becca. You are I, she, her pronouns. I live in inner Northeast Portland in the Sabin King neighborhood. Actually been in this neighborhood for about 25 years. And ditto to all of the things that everyone has said. Democracy is not just an idea, but it is in action. So more transparent and accessible and inclusive and participatory. And I will pass it to Kari.
Hey all, Kari Chisholm, he, him pronouns. I currently live in Southwest Portland, just off of Barber Boulevard. I've actually lived in 5 of the 6 quadrants of Portland. I've been running the bases for the last 25 years. Democracy. I would say what makes a better democracy for me is when voters are informed as to the choices they have to make. I think that's particularly relevant to this group. We saw, I think, in the city council races, a lot of frustrated voters. Not they didn't know how to do ranked choice voting. That was easy. They felt there was too many candidates they had no information about. And I think that was in part due to the public campaign finance budget cut that the city laid on, dropping the tiers from 100, 200, 300,000 to 40, 80. Oh,
Dwight, can you hear us?
maybe not.
I just sent him a request to unmute. Oh, shoot.
Sorry, Dwight's been having some technical issues this morning, so we'll get those worked out.
Would anyone else like to introduce themselves? Hayden, do you also want to introduce yourself? You've been so integral to this program too.
Sure, and I apologize. My webcam is being really weird and not wanting to work this morning. Speaking of technical issues. Hi, my name is Hayden Millers. I use he, him pronouns. I am a strategic initiatives manager in the COO's office, and I'm supporting Daniel. I've really kind of been working to stand this up. I'm the one who's been emailing you the last couple months, and really excited that we've had Daniel join in the last couple of weeks and in this role as the program manager. And I'm just here now really in a support role to support you all and facilitate the conversations you're going to be having. So very much grateful for the time and energy that you all have volunteered to put forward to help make this a reality.
Great. Thank you so much. So I think we are back to a good place now. Everyone can see my screen. We've resumed the recording. And so I think we're ready to go ahead with the presentation. I do want to speak a little bit about our role in here and Hayden and my role in here. We're here to support you all. And, specifically for me as a program manager, you can please count on me as a resource for you and to help guide these meetings and provide an agenda and, I think research and, help arrange the fastest of these meetings. But ultimately, you all are the implementation advisory committee, and it's up to you all to evaluate the research we have here and the policy considerations, and then make policy recommendations too. So, again, like, more than happy to step in and provide, guidance or advice as necessary, as requested. But also, like, it's your committee and you have the power to, help, organize these meetings as you wish and to make the recommendations that you see fit for Multnomah County. So with that, I think what I'm going to do is begin with the presentation. And if you cannot see my screen, please let me know too. Okay, so let's talk about the IAC's roadmap here. So as we said, what's the IAC's goal? And of course, again, that means the Implementation Advisory Committee. So what you'll be accomplishing is you're going to be building a series of policy recommendations for a new public campaign financing program for county elections too. Public campaign financing program is just what the term the county uses for its public matching program. But there are a wide variety of terms, and sometimes we use, public matching, sometimes we use public financing, public campaign financing, but these are just different terms, meaning the same concept too. So the committee will be building a series of policy recommendations, and then you'll be delivering a report to the county board outlining those recommendations. And then the county board will be, making considerations about the policy and, what recommendations to adopt and how to, and using those recommendations to incorporate into, the plan it has that it will be building to. So your recommendations really, I guess all that's to say is that it is the county board's ultimate final responsibility to pass this policy, but they will rely heavily on your recommendations too. And so the work we do here really matters. And then how you'll be doing that is you'll be evaluating data from past elections and other programs. You'll be interviewing stakeholders. We'll be receiving public feedback, and we'll be conducting and reviewing research, which also includes research that you request. So if you ever ask, Daniel, can you help pull together, the average amount of money that candidates for city council raised in the last 3 elections, that's something I can do for you. So we'll be conducting and reviewing research, and that's what I mean by that. And then contributing your own perspectives and analyses. Each of you has an expertise and a deep connection to your communities, and and certainly like your own worldview about what could make this program work and succeed for Multnomah County. So we welcome you to bring those forward. You don't have to be an expert in public campaign financing to have a perspective on this, and we do want to hear your perspectives too. Questions so far? Okay. So here's your timeline. This timeline is a rough approximation. It just gives you the general sense of what the frame is we're working within. It doesn't mean that like literally, I think we're not going to take it literally quite yet. We're still going to come back to you with the specific dates to look out for. But this gives you a sense of how we're going to be coordinating this work over the time frame we have. We do have a short time frame. The goal is to launch a program in time for the 2026 elections. And so, which of course will be held a little over a year or two. So we're really going to be focusing 2025 on building out the policy recommendations, passing the policy of the county board, collecting that public feedback, incorporating that in the policies, and then implementing this too. So this is a visualizer here. We'll research and evaluation. That's again what we talked about here with the data, the other programs, and what we've learned so far and how programs are administered across the country. We have your phase 1 and your phase 2, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about what exactly that means, why there's a phase 1 and phase 2. But the core of it is that there's just not enough time to consider all and pass the entire policy within before the county board takes us up in our April to June timeline. So the most efficient way to do it is to have the IAC build out its initial phase of recommendations with the high level work and things such as like how much in matching funds will be provided to the campaigns. What does it mean that how can candidates qualify for matching? What are the contribution limits? These are like the high level considerations that are critical to guiding a lot of what shakes out within the rest of the policy. So that'll be phase one, and then phase two, the IAC will, I think be getting a little bit more granular in its recommendations, like what's the process for requesting a hearing, and what rules are in place to allow for to prevent conflicts of interest on the Oversight Commission. So we're breaking these up into different phases for that reason, but again, we'll go into more granular detail later in this training. So the first phase will be those high-level questions that we'll be getting into, and then from there, you'll be utilizing that information, that research, and of course your own perspectives and the community feedback to build a series of recommendations. And then we'll be incorporating those recommendations into a report that will be provided to the county board. And the report will cover, not only the recommendations, but why you made those recommendations, what are things to be concerned about, what are, the guiding, the guideposts for you all as to why you are making these choices as well. And all the while, there will be a number of community listening sessions. I think reasonably we could do 2 community sessions before the report begins to be written. And that will give enough time for those community listening sessions to be incorporated into your, into your research and your evaluations. So at least 2 community sessions, likely in January and February, hopefully more if we have time. But so that's going to be a little bit of a hat trick, is doing the research and evaluation, the community listening sessions, the recommendations, and the report writing, all by the time we get to around mid-March. And then we'll be sharing that report with the county board, which will be incorporating that into its own review, and it will be considering the policy to pass, and also it'll be crafting the budget as well. So, the county has not begun the process of writing its budget. It will begin that a little later in 2025, likely late winter, early spring. And then that's one of the most critical decisions it makes, is the budget that it passes. And so both the board will both be reviewing the recommendations and making decisions around the policy and the budget around the same time too. And they'll be kind of interplaying with each other as well. Then we'll be moving on to IAC phase 2, which we talked about are kind of more of those granular questions that are critical to be, reviewing and making recommendations on, or even adopting if the Oversight Commission has administrative powers, which is another decision you all be making, but that will be in phase 2. And that's what I mean by IAC admin rules adoption. Are there certain powers delegated to administrative rules that the IAC can just pass on its own, or another committee could pass on its own too. And that's the decision for the IAC to make. And then we'll also be implementing, the program and making sure we're doing public education, making sure we're getting the word out to campaigns, candidates, community organizations, and members of the public, so they know what this program entails. And if someone wants to run for office, they know what they'd be signing up for. So kind of a tight timeline, and there is a lot to cover, which we'll talk about in a second. But it just does give you a sense of the work that's ahead of us, and what are these critical deadlines that we'll be looking at too. Whoops. Do we have questions about the timeline?
Maybe this will get answered as you move throughout, because it really has to do with our scope. And does our scope in terms of recommendations, is it specific and limited to recommendations for policy, or are our recommendations also around implementation and public education?
There will be some of those. You know, for instance, like we will be building a website that allows for reporting of contributions and expenditures and allows for some level of public transparency. And we do look to the IAC to help with crafting that scope and helping to see that part of the project through. And certainly the IAC, whether it's a formal recommendation or just in the conversations you all have, you do have the ability to guide, you know, the public education and help craft, you know, what will be evaluating the community listening sessions too. And we also look to the IAC to help be ambassadors for this program as well. You know, members of the public may be bringing their own concerns or thoughts to you privately, you know, which you are welcome to share with us. You know, we are, the reason the county went with this route is to bring members of the public together who are embedded in different communities. So we do, you know, we do hope that IAC members share the views from community members they talk to about these. And then, you know, there might be like it's a two-way street in terms of communication. So we might ask IAC members to help with communicating about the program's intentions and the goals with members of the community too. So to answer your question, the recommendations for sure are very much embedded in the work you'll be doing, but we do look to the IAC to help guide this program in total. Other questions? Okay. And if you think of questions later, please feel free to ask. We can always go back to a slide. And also one thing I've learned about myself in the 37 years I've been on this planet is I'm a fast speaker, and sometimes it can be a little hard to understand. So feel free to ask me to repeat something if you don't feel you have it the first time too. Okay. Moving along. So a little overview of how Multnomah County elections work. So Multnomah County is divided up into 4 commissioner districts, and they can count them on a left to right basis. So this is District 1, which is the west side and a little bit of the inner east side. District 2 is, and in District 1 recently elected Megan Moyer as its county commissioner. And then District 2 elected Shannon Singleton as its county commissioner. And District 2 is inner and a little outer northeast, including the airport. District 3 is Commissioner Julie Brim Edwards, who's been in office for a few years now, and that is inner and outer southeast. And District 4 has a new commissioner in Commissioner Vince Dixon Jones, and that is Gresham all the way out to, you know, Corbett and Troutdale, and some of these other communities out here. Definitely geographically the largest district. By you know, by law, the districts have to be relatively close in population. Oh, and I'm sorry, there's also a county chair, and the county chair is Chair Jessica Vega Peterson, and Chair Vega Peterson is elected by, you know, folks from all across the county. And there are 2 other positions that are elected countywide. It's the auditor and the sheriff too. And then finally, there's a district attorney who's elected countywide, but the district attorney is a state position and is not eligible for this program. So the kind of looks like it got a little cut off here, but the populations have got to be around equal size. So each county, you can see here is 147,000, 147,000. I think this is 141,000. This is 130,000. They'll never be exactly the same population numbers, but they have to be close enough to be within a certain percentage of each other. which is why you see a variation here. And then they have to be geographically compact. They have to allow for communities of interest to stay together. There's a number of other, requirements and rubric to evaluate when they create these districts.
Daniel, are those numbers the population numbers or the voter numbers?
I think these are the voter numbers, actually.
Right. So they're required to be equal in population, but not in voters, which is why East County has fewer voters.
Yes, thank you for that correction. I appreciate that.
Great.
And then in terms of, so the elections are kind of stacked. Not everyone's up at the same time. So for instance, in 2026, Multnomah County will have a chair's race and a race for District 2, which again is right here, and then for auditor and sheriff. And then the other districts like District 1, 3, and 4 will be up in 2028. So there are elections for some county positions, at least some county positions, every 2 years. The elections are nonpartisan. We do not have partisan primaries. They look a little different to what you would expect if you're a close watcher of like gubernatorial races or presidential races for that reason. The county recently moved over to ranked choice voting and with a single winner. So there's some commonalities with the city of Portland, which recently had its ranked choice voting elections began in 2024. Multnomah County will have some overlap, but not total overlap. So it has some overlap in that it will be a single election in November. We will no longer have a primary and then a runoff election like we used to have for county positions. Now it'll be all the races will be up in November. And that was decided because that allows for November elections are the elections with the highest turnout and the most voter participation. So I think the folks who helped craft this policy felt that they wanted to make sure the elections were held when most voters were plugging in. So it'll be one election in November, which is going to be a major thing that you all will be using to evaluate how much in matching funds to provide, what the timeline will look at, and other considerations for the policy. So nonpartisan election, one election in November, but it will use ranked choice voting. And the city had in the city's election for the council, the top 3 candidates win. Multnomah County elections will still have a single winner from each district.
Is it different
As I
in any
said-
way than the mayor race was a single winner as well? Is there anything about it that's going to be different in the way that the mayor's race in Portland was done, or is it basically the same idea?
That's a level of detail I'll have to look into and I can circle back. So let me just take note of that question, Kari.
Kari, I'm 99% sure it's the
It's
same.
the same.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
it's
Daniel.
the same single winner.
Okay, thank you. And as we said, all candidates will be on the same ballot in November, except the district attorney, and district attorney will still be in the same primary, and then top 2 advancing in November dynamic. But again, the DA is not eligible for this program because that is a state office. There is still a provision that allows for special elections to fill vacancies to be held in May or November. And there's a number of factors for why it would be in May or November for when they hold a special election. But the IEC will still have to evaluate how to define a matching program that allows for special elections too. And then the total number of voters here is 567,056. And so that kind of gives us an evaluation when we think about the qualification metrics or the contribution limits. This is it's the most populous county in Oregon. I think that should be a critical part of the rubric when making the policy decisions here. Other questions about Multnomah County elections, and they can be very simple questions or very complex questions, and we'll see what we can answer today. Okay, let me just check that chat. Okay, great. Actually, Hayden, are you able to check the chat?
Yes. I
Okay.
don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay. I'm gonna ask you all to direct questions to Hayden or put them in the chat for everyone function because I realize I'm recording this meeting, and so if I open the chat window, it's gonna show up on the recording what people ask. So please direct the questions to Hayden.
We did have one question if we have a end date for your appointments. We do not at this time have an end date. We think that because that is because the role of this committee is one of the topics, and Daniel's going to talk about this, that I think is going to be a topic for a recommendation to come out of in the report. So I just wanted to provide that. We did have one member ask that question, so that's the answer I shared.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. So here's how to build a matching program. We're going to get into the guidelines of how matching programs work across the country and what to keep in mind as you all are evaluating the policy options. So this is a map of where matching programs exist. There's a little over, I think it's like 41 matching programs across the country, including, actually we have a matching program at the presidential level. And so you can see the red shows where these matching programs exist. You know, Multnomah County is shaded in here. It's harder to see. But you can tell a lot of major cities in the US, particularly in the West, have matching programs. Seattle, Multnomah County, San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, Los Angeles, you know, we have Tucson, and we also have like Santa Fe, Albuquerque, etc. And then the state is shaded blue. It has a matching program for state level races. So we do have a wide number of programs across the country and a lot of geographical diversity in the programs too. And we do, again, have a presidential public matching program. It's just that, unfortunately, there's a dynamic where sometimes programs are underfunded and they don't have enough matching funds to give out to candidates. And in the case of underfunded programs, unfortunately, candidates decide not to compete in them for their own strategic reasons. And so the presidential matching system has actually been in place since the 1970s, but since 2008, a lot of the candidates have decided to opt out of that matching program, but it does technically exist. Okay.
Hey, Daniel.
Yeah.
Forgive me if maybe this is if coming in a different side, but if it's not, is there also a way that we can get a map that has an overlay and intersection of jurisdictions who have a matching program and who have RCV? Like I know Oakland and San Francisco and Seattle, Portland, obviously, and now DC, but it'd be nice if we could look at jurisdictions who have that intersection, knowing that Multnomah County will have that coming together in 2026.
Yeah, great question. I will definitely look into that, and I've taken note of your request, Becca. Okay.
Daniel, I'm tracking follow-ups as well, so we can loop back after this and make sure we follow up on that.
Oh, thank you, Hayden.
Thank you.
Okay. So I think one of the core things to keep in mind when designing a matching program is matching programs are all optional. The Supreme Court in 1976 in Buckley v. Vallejo struck down the ability to mandate participation. So candidates have the right to opt in or out of matching programs, as any program across the country is not allowed to require candidates to run under it. So the programs can definitely incentivize candidates to run under them, but they cannot be a requirement. Which means programs are successful if they are designed to attract the candidates. Candidates should be able to see this as their best option and that they can thrive under the program. You know, the programs are successful if candidates feel that they can raise enough and campaign with modern tactics too. So one thing I did not say in my introduction is that I spent 5 years working as deputy director for the Small Donor Elections Program, which is a matching program that the city of Portland provides for candidates running for mayor, city council, and auditor. So, you know, I was deeply embedded in the process of building that program and implementing it. And one of the core components of that program, which I think was a success story, was that the program was very customer facing. And, you know, matching programs can be challenging to navigate. There are a wide number of rules and guidelines to follow. So the campaign should be able to get guidance from that's responsive, clear, and timely from staff. And you know, one of the core values of a successful program is that the staff is here to, you know, help hold candidates' hands, for lack of a better term, through the process to make sure that campaigns can succeed. So one of the ways that public matching programs can succeed is if the program staff is customer facing. And we're using customer in quotes. Good. Another core component that comes out of the fact that these are matchable or optional is that they should be simple and straightforward. So stakeholders, candidates, and the public should be able to understand how these programs work and why they're beneficial. You know, I think the IEC, when it develops these programs and also when it communicates about this program, members should be able to boil this down into an elevator speech, which an elevator speech is just a term that campaigns use, you know, and describe being able to like kind of synthesize what are the benefits in the time it takes to take an elevator from floor 1 to floor 2. So the program should be simple and straightforward enough that we should be able to explain it easily, and then community members and campaigns and organizations can also explain it to each other easily too. The more complicated the design of the programs, the harder they are to understand. And when they're hard to understand, campaigns make more mistakes, they accidentally violate the rules, and more end up opting out of the program. If campaigns see a complicated rubric and you know don't understand all the facets of the program and feel very overwhelmed and intimidated by running under the program, they're going to opt out, and the program is not going to be able to succeed. So campaigns really have to feel like they can get their head around the details, and you know that's one of the core components for designing a program like this. And then finally, you know, programs should be wary of penalties. Penalties are a tool in the tool belt for being able to ensure that campaigns stay in compliance and follow the rules. But we should be wary of overusing them. So, you know, most violations, and one of the lessons we learned from the city's operation of its public financing program is most violations happen because campaigns make mistakes, not because they have nefarious intent. So, you know, they report other contributions, but they, you know, neglect to turn in this one form over here, or, you know, they miss a couple of donors over here, or they accept a donation that's too large because they don't quite understand how the limits all work together. You know, those are all accidental violations. And, you know, I think over penalizing campaigns for accidental violations is going to cause problems for the program. The focus should really be on correcting the mistake and teaching better practices. And we're not really here to punish people-powered campaigns. Because a lot of these candidates are people who are embedded in their community. They may be running for the very first time, or they may be running from underrepresented communities, or they may be running on issues they really care about too. And a lot of times when candidates run for office, they are doing it with a genuine desire to change their community for the better. We might not all agree on the policy platforms, but I would say like most candidates are really bringing their best intent when running for office too. And it's critical not to, you know, over penalize and make their lives difficult when they run. And then tying campaigns up in constant investigations and hearings and penalties will repel candidates from opting in. If they look at the program and say, I have a greater chance of being penalized and investigated and having negative stories written about me, I'm not going to run under that program. So, we don't want to repel candidates from opting in. We also don't want to discourage campaigns from reporting the mistakes for fear of investigations and penalties. And we don't want to obscure the value for the public discourse. I think one thing that's a critical lesson that many programs across the country often talk about is the fact that, like, every time the program penalizes a candidate or begins an investigation into a candidate, that's going to be covered extensively by the news. And, we certainly want to be transparent, and we certainly want the public to be engaged in the decisions that the program makes. But at the same time, if the public are reading article after article after article about how the program is penalizing candidates and investigating them, that really takes away from the focus. And the focus on the program is allowing candidates from all backgrounds to run for office and bringing more people into our democracy. So again, penalties are going to be a part of the program. They will be built into the policy, and they will be a significant component that you all will be evaluating when you design this program. So they are definitely a tool, and they're a valuable tool, but we should be wary about overusing them too. So all that is to say is that public matching programs are optional. We cannot require candidates to participate, and so the program must be designed to be attractive to the candidates so that they feel they can succeed under the program. Do you have questions so far about this slide or anything in the chat that's been asked?
Nothing in the chat, Daniel.
Okay, thank you. And we've also put some time in at the very end to evaluate, to have some discussion and, to evaluate other questions. So if you're not quite ready to ask it now or talk about it now, that's okay. There will be time later on in today's meeting for that. This is the general process for matching programs. I'm not going to read this, entirely. I will be sending a copy of the training to you all. And of course, as well as that recording that we talked about. But this is the general flow of how most matching programs work across the country. And so the first step is the program will adopt the policies that you all will be recommending and the county board will be considering. The program adopts the policies and puts the policies in place and then receives the funding. And then that funding, of course, helps the program operate and hire staff. But the largest use of the funding is going to be distributed in matching funds to the campaigns. So step one is the program receives the policies and receives that funding. And then once the budget is fully set and the programs and the policies have been, implemented and are communicated to the public, candidates start to sign up and participate under the program. And, and that's when they really begin to, that's when the qualification metrics come in, i.e., like, what do they have to do to qualify for the program? What kind of paperwork do they have to fill out at the beginning? What kind of reporting do they have to do to stay in compliance? So step two, candidates are signing up and participating. Step three is when those candidates qualify, if and when a candidate qualifies, they then get their matching funds, and then they use those funds to campaign. And then after the election ends, we have a winner, or at least one winner in each race. Excuse me. And the campaign shut down, and then the program staff works with the oversight body, with stakeholders, and with the public to evaluate what worked and what needed improvement. And then it incorporates all of that, as well as new research and new considerations, into developing and updating the policy for the following election cycle. So that is the general flow of how these programs work. Again, you as a committee, you all have the ability to create the program that works best for Multnomah County. I think that this slide is just meant to give you kind of a guideline and like a high level view of how these programs operate. Okay, let's look at questions that you all be considering. I'm going to give you these questions ahead of time now, so you have some time to like reflect on them during the holidays. And but you know, they will of course come up again throughout the meetings that you all will be conducting. But just gives you a preview of the high level questions. And also, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of everything you will be evaluating. These are just kind of the general big picture buckets that the policy questions are going to fall under. So one of the top questions you'll be considering is how much can candidates raise, i.e. what the contribution limit is. Because we're an optional program, the program can implement its own contribution limits. It doesn't have to follow the limits of, you know, the state or the county. It can develop its own limits unless there's, you know, a specific rule it needs to keep in mind.
Wait,
So you all will be
in this
charged
program,
with.
are we allowed to raise the limit above 568, or are we limited to that 568 passed in 2016?
That's a good question. I think you are able to raise it to whatever level seems best for you, or whatever level seems right for you all. But I will get you a firm answer on that one.
Thank you.
And Kari, I'll just note as well, we're also analyzing the recent state legislation that was passed around campaign finance, and so we're working with our county attorneys to kind of do a comprehensive analysis of how this overlays with existing county charter, you know, the multiple layers of that. So that will be information that we'll be able to provide to the committee as we get closer to tackling that specific question.
Thank you.
So yeah, you all be evaluating contribution limits. But it's a balance, because if you put the limits too high, candidates are still going to be relying on the wealthiest donors, and it's going to keep the cost of running for office higher, and it's going to put the focus on you know, the donors who've been funding these campaigns for, you know, historically. It's you know, I think one of the goals of contribution limits is to incentivize candidates to raise small amounts from everyday people too. And I do want to clarify, you know, everyone in the county has a voice, and I'm not saying any of this to impugn the character of people who donate larger amounts. They care very much about their county, and they're trying, you know, I think a lot of their intent is to, you know, help participate, and help, you know, set the county on the course that they believe is right. And so there's nothing wrong with people who donate like larger amounts of money. I'm not meant to impugn that. I think that it is important to recognize, though, that there is a growing belief among the public all across the country that everyday people's voices, you know, often are valued less than the voices of big donors. I'm not saying that that's necessarily right or wrong. I'm just saying that that is the view of a lot of individuals within the U.S. and within Multnomah County too. So the goal of contribution limits in a program like this is to kind of like make sure that every voter and every individual in the county feels like their voice matters, even if they can't donate a large amount. So I just want to give that big caveat going to this conversation. Anyway, you all will be evaluating, you know, where to set the contribution limits. If you set the contribution limits too high, campaigns are still relying on big donations. But if you set the contribution limits too low, then it's harder to be able to raise enough money to be competitive, because campaigns are trying to communicate with thousands, or within the county, hundreds of thousands of voters. That is expensive, and they need to be able to raise enough money to get their message out and also to compete with third-party organizations who don't have spending limits in place. So that's why the limits need to strike a balance. They have to be high enough that campaigns can raise enough to be competitive and get the message out, but low enough that the focus is still on everyday people, and the people within the community of within all communities of the county. So that's a balance to always strike. And just to give you some context, the Portland Small Donor Elections Program had a contribution limit of $350 per donor. That number shifted. It was originally $250, and it was raised to $350 to account for lesser expected funding in the 2024 election and the high cost of running for office. So as much as possible, I'm going to be able to provide you with an awareness of how the city runs their public matching program, so that way how that policy was designed, and that can inform your discussions too. But the contribution limits in the city were up to $350 per donor, and they applied to individuals in certain organizations. So some organizations were allowed to give directly to candidates. Some were only allowed to give in-kind donations to candidates, which we will be getting into later. And some organizations were not allowed to give at all. And then individuals all had had contribution limits that they were able to give under. Any individual within the U.S. was able to give up to $350 to a candidate running for office in the city of Portland, as long as that individual was allowed to give under federal law. And I think Kari hinted at this earlier, but Multnomah County has its own contribution limits passed in the charter. And these are the honest elections limits, are what we refer to them colloquially, because Honest Elections is an organization and is a coalition to help lead the passage of those limits. And those limits are up to $568 per donor. And they apply to individuals and political committees with certain exceptions. So the Multnomah County Honest Elections, again, is just a colloquial term I'm using here. Those contribution limits have applied to everyone running for county office recently. So before this program was in existence, like for instance, in the 2022 election cycle and the 2024 election cycle, candidates were running under $568 per donor was the limit that they had to interact with. When we designed the matching program, and when you all put forward the set of recommendations that you feel are right for this program here, you are allowed to certainly match the contribution limits of the Multnomah County Honest Elections limits, or you can set a different amount. If you set a different amount, then candidates who opt out of the matching program would then run under those contribution limits. So if I decide to run under the matching program, I would run under the matching limits or under the contribution limits that you all recommend and the county passes. But if I opt out of the program, I'd be running under the $568 per donor limit. And I do believe that number changes based on inflation. So it won't always be $568. But it's a critical understanding to bring into the discussions. So the IEC will be considering and recommending policy options around where do you set the contribution limits, who do the limits apply to, i.e. which individuals in which organizations, and are the limits the same for all offices? Does someone running for chair run under the same contribution limits as someone running for sheriff and auditor, which are usually less expensive races? That's a consideration that the IEC will be reviewing. Questions about contribution limits before I move on? Okay. Next question is, who can donate to candidates and who gets matched? So, we want, when you're placing contribution limits, again, what that does is that focuses the candidate's attention on where they're raising money from. And if the limits are well designed, candidates spend most of their time raising money from everyday people in their communities, and it helps put Multnomah County residents at the center of our democracy. You know, I think one of the balances you're going to be evaluating is these limits make sure candidates are connecting with actual people they seek to represent. And so like that means that, you know, there are benefits to putting contribution limits. Or I think like that informs how you are setting how you are setting these limits. But it's also critical to understand that organizations that are typically engaged in campaigns are made up of people who are working on issues that are critical to candidates to engage with. And candidates need to be able to raise, so organizations, I think like one evaluation that the city would make is that organizations represent everyday people who live in the county, or in this case in the city. And they represent, and they're working on issues that are you know, critical for the candidates to engage with. And so there should be an avenue for organizations to contribute and engage with the candidates directly too. And that allows for that level of interaction. And it also allows for candidates to be able to raise enough to compete and not get drowned out by third-party groups or independent expenditures, as we refer to them in the campaign finance world. So one thing you're balancing is, you know, which donors will the program match, and are, you know, how are organizations able to engage and interact with the candidates and support or oppose candidates that, you know, that are running for office too. As we said before, the city's small donor elections program, most individuals and organizations were able to give what are called startup funds or seed funds, as you know, as they were officially called. Organizations can give larger in-kind donations, but it depended on what kind of organization it was and what would be donated to. And then almost anyone across the country can contribute, but only Portlanders could get matched under the program because the program was designed to centralize everyday people in the city and the democracy. So these are all questions that you'll be evaluating too, along with how are in-kind donations made, and are there any donors or organizations that are prohibited from giving entirely? Those are all questions for you all to be considering. Do you have questions about this slide?
I don't really have a question. I have more of a comment that goes back to my introduction. To me, what's critical here is we have enough money in the system so that, as your first bullet says, candidates are able to connect with the actual people they seek to represent. Because after all, connecting with actual voters isn't just about how they raise their money, it's about how they spend their money. When they're forced to choose between sending mail and building a field campaign, we're actually reducing the amount of connection they have with the actual people they seek to represent. So you're going to hear me say this again and again and again. It's not just the candidates need to be competitive, it's they just need to be able to communicate at all. And that was what we saw as a big flaw in the Portland system because of those budget cuts, which again were not part of the original intent of the program, but is how it was operationalized in 2024.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective, Kari. Other questions or, you know, thoughts so far?
Daniel, I'll flag Marshall just raised his hand.
Okay.
Yeah, I threw my question in the chat. I see over in our recommendations that we are looking at how the in-kind donations are made. My question is, will we be evaluating what type of donations are allowed? That seemed to be a real struggle with the city of Portland's in-kind donations, and what they were allowing was so obtuse you couldn't even, you know, pay for a mailer for a candidate. Let's say that was not in the allowed in-kind donations, depending on your organization type. So I would personally like to have the conversation about what type of in-kind donations will be allowed from our group here.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that is absolutely on the agenda for the IAC to be talking about. And, you know, because these are optional programs, the IEC has the ability to set like a wide range of policies when it comes to contributions, including in-kind contributions too. And again, these are recommendations that I'll be sending on to the county board to evaluate. But this is on the agenda for you all to consider for sure. Other questions?
I have more of a process question.
Mhm.
I really appreciate you sharing these slides with us in terms of what we need to be thinking about over the break before we come back together. I'm wondering, do you envision engaging the full group in an exercise where we come up with like a set of shared goals or a set of shared objectives or a set of shared criteria that we use to evaluate all of these questions, right? Along the lines of the question you asked us earlier, which is like, what do we believe is a better democracy? Like, are we gonna have as a committee, like, here are the 4 things we're gonna use to evaluate all of our policy considerations. Like, it's gonna increase transparency. It's going to, avoid confusion. It's going to be easy to comply with. Whatever it is that we agree to. I think I have found it, in other endeavors where we're digging deep and into, honestly, sometimes the minutia around the policy, which we should. It's helpful to have criteria to help guide that work, but I don't know if that's part of what you're contemplating.
Yeah,
terms
I
of how
appreciate
we
that
manage our work.
question. Oh, go ahead. I heard someone else's voice.
No, that was it. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I do appreciate that question. Coming with a kind of a guiding light or, your shared vision or goals that you'll be using when you evaluate these policies is important too. It's a balance because we also have a very tight timeline to make to review policies and consider them, but I do think that that is a fundamental piece of the work too. So, let us follow up with you all about how to best like incorporate that into the work too.
Daniel, I just want to give you a quick time check. It's we have about 20 minutes left on the meeting.
Okay, yeah, thank you. All right, well, let's move through. We do have time for questions and discussion at the end too. So let's move through the slides as thoroughly but quickly as we can too. Okay. So another thing you'll be evaluating is how do candidates qualify for the program. Usually candidates qualification thresholds make sure matching funds go to candidates with the most popular support. Or at least like a sufficient level of popular support. These programs don't typically give out matching funds to everyone who runs for office. They give them out to candidates who can demonstrate enough public support. So the question is, how do they demonstrate it under this program? Higher thresholds mean that matching funds are supporting candidates who actively campaign and have deep roots in the community, but lower thresholds give candidates a chance to compete who are not incumbents or not necessarily starting out with a lot of institutional support. So striking that balance and how you set the candidate qualification thresholds is a critical part of what the IEC is going to be considering, along with we talked about what the threshold number is going to be. Are the threshold based by district or by county? So for Portland elections, candidates for council and auditor need 250 donations or 250 donors giving at least $5 each to qualify for matching, and it's 750 if they were running for mayor. And I can come back to you later about like how that translated to a number of candidates who were able to qualify. But that's a number. And then candidates can raise those donations under the city program. Candidates can raise those qualifying donations from any donor across the city. The donor did not have to live in their district. But one thing you will be considering is, do you want a certain portion or all of the qualifying donations to come from that district if they are running in a district race? And obviously, if they're running for chair, auditor, sheriff, they're running countywide. Are there different thresholds for different offices as there are in the city? What is the number threshold? And then, is it going to be donations they received, or some other programs have signatures, like you have to have a certain number of signatures to qualify? Or is there a third option out there, or some kind of combination for how candidates qualify for office too? So these are all kind of the some of the evaluations you all will be considering. And then how much in matching funds the candidates can receive that's probably one of the most important and fundamental questions you all will be evaluating. Because match caps, as they're called, i.e. the total matching funds the program can distribute, match caps are protected to design the program's budget. They're fiscally responsible for the choice to make, and they create predictability for the candidates. Because if everyone has a match cap, that means candidates know how much they're able to receive from the county, and they can factor that into their budgets. The higher the match cap you set, the more funds candidates have to communicate with voters and campaign effectively. But low match caps help the program avoid insolvency because we don't have unlimited funds to give out. And they ensure there's enough matching funds for all candidates who qualify. So that is a balance you all will be evaluating. For the city, originally the policy was set at $750,000 was the match cap that the program could give for candidates for mayor, $300,000 for council, and $100,000 for auditor. But that was lowered in 2024 due to underfunding. So in 2024, candidates for mayor could only receive $100,000. Candidates for city council could only receive $120,000, and candidates for auditor could only receive $40,000. That was not the original intent of the match cap, but that was lowered to that amount based on underfunding of the program. So you all will be considering, what are the match caps for the candidates? Are there different amounts for different offices? And can they be adjusted mid-cycle? In case there is underfunding that occurs. And then one of the most critical policies you'll be considering is, what is the method for distributing those funds? Because there are actually a wide number of match methods across the country that are in use. So the most common is a ratio multiple match, which is essentially, if I give you $5 as a donor, the program will give you, say, I'm picking a number here, $25 as a program. Or if I give you $20 as a donor, the program will give you $200 in matching funds. And I'm making those numbers up, but they illustrate that the match is based on a ratio of how much the donor gave. So a ratio multiple match is what I mean by that. And they are given, usually they are given continually throughout the cycle, instead of 4 times throughout the cycle. They're given, over the course of, they're given many, many times over the course of months until candidates reach their match cap. There's a number of benefits and drawbacks to each of these. And one thing that does come to mind for ratio multiple match is, this isn't meant to push you all to one direction or the other. But bigger donations do mean bigger matches. So under a ratio multiple match, if I get $5 as a donor, it's going to result in a smaller match than if I give $25 as a donor. So that's the fundamental truth of the program, of that match method. Other programs use block grants, which means once candidates reach a certain number of donors, they are entitled to a block grant of, let's say, $20,000 or $50,000. It's an identical payment. And that's usually given once or periodically. So, it may be given 3 times throughout the election cycle, once every couple of months. The program may decide to give out $50,000 at a time in block grants. One thing about that is that all donations are treated the same regardless of size. So under these programs, if I give you $5 or if I give you $300 as a donor, the candidate running for office is still going to receive the same block grant because it's based on the quantity of donations, not necessarily on the donation amount. And then some programs use vouchers. This is a new development. I know there's a lot of excitement around vouchers. And what that is this is used in the city of Seattle and will soon be used in the city of Oakland. Is that every donor every individual who qualifies across the county or across the city is sent a voucher or a number of vouchers, and then they can give those vouchers to the candidates. The candidates then turn those vouchers over to the program, and the program matches them. So that is a unique way of running these programs. But it's a set amount based on whatever the donor gave. Personal funds are not required for giving. So under a voucher program, if you're given, like the city of Seattle does, 4 vouchers of $25 each, then if you give that voucher to a candidate, you're not actually giving any money out of your own pocket. You're just essentially designating what the county has given you to the candidate. And these are usually given in installments throughout the cycle. The city of Portland had a ratio multiple match program or method, and it used 9-to-1 on $20, meaning that if I, as a donor, gave you $20, the program would then give you 9 times that, or 180 in matching funds, for a total of $200. Or if I give you $5, the program would give you $45 in matching funds, and then the candidate will walk away with $50. So you'll definitely be evaluating which of these methods makes the most sense for Multnomah County. And this is a chart showing that 48% of programs use ratio multiple match, but flat grants are common. And then some do a mixture of grant and ratio. And then, as we said before, there are 2 that do vouchers. And then this is the same, it just shows the number. We have around 20 who do ratio multiple match, as in 20 programs use that option. You also will be evaluating what candidates spend their matching funds on. So spending restrictions help prevent abuse of the program and misuse of taxpayer funds. We want to give matching funds to candidates to allow them to communicate with voters and campaign. We don't want to give matching funds to candidates to enrich themselves. So that is a balance that you all will be striking, is how do you set the rules to prevent personal enrichment and to undercut the program's credibility. But you do want to not have too many restrictions, because you want to allow candidates to be able to innovate and try different tactics and strategies, and again, not ensnare them in too many investigations or penalties. And for the sake of time, I'm going to not go through every piece of the slide, but again, I'll be sending the slide out to you all, or the slide deck to you all. And then how the programs are funded, that is a very important aspect you all will be evaluating too. The matching programs need adequate funds, and they need to be reliable funding too, to allow the program to succeed. So the program needs to provide enough funding to campaigns to allow them to compete and win, and communicate with enough voters and share their messaging. Programs need funding, and the program itself will need funding in order to maintain staff capacity and help the program move quickly and responsively when it comes to addressing the needs of the public and campaigns and stakeholders. But the program needs reliable and predictable funding too, so campaigns can budget effectively and candidates know what they're signing up for and how much to receive. Portland had just a general allocation funding once a year, and that did come with pluses and minuses, or I should say pros and cons. And so you all will be considering whether it should be an annual allocation, a funding formula, or some other option. And that's a recommendation you'll make for the county board to consider, because the county board has to evaluate this program's budget against every other program's budget too. And then what kind of oversight is this? I'm not going to go through the entirety of the slide, but the program does need to be accountable and transparent and receive guidance. So, who does the program answer to? Who is overseeing the program? That's an important decision you'll all be making when you issue your recommendations to. Most programs answer to some kind of independent oversight commission or council, but some answer directly to elected officials themselves. And there's also additional oversight tools such as audits, performance reports, and public hearings. These are some of the criticisms to be aware of. These are common criticisms of matching programs. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but I'm just saying that these will be what you all are confronting when you design the policy. Things such as, this program is costing too much money. The candidates can embezzle or misuse of matching funds. The program is picking winners or losers, based on political bias. And the programs are not transformative enough. The same kind of candidates that were winning before are still winning under these programs. And there's, the candidates who did not feel like they could compete under the previous system are still not feeling they can compete under this new system too. So these are things to keep in mind when we design the policy, is how can we, address these criticisms and bake that into the policy itself. So finally, next steps, and why don't we actually take some time for quick questions? We are a little bit over, but if there's like a quick urgent question you all have, or an item that needs to be discussed right now, I think this would be a perfect time to bring those up.
I just had a quick question around community engagement. If I remember correctly, on the timeline slide, I can't remember exactly what you called it, but sometime in January, there's community
Listening sessions.
And that is like us having opening meetings where we're soliciting feedback, or they're hosted community listening sessions that we are a part of, or how are those structured? And then a related question, is that the only feedback, or is there like continual email solicitation, or are there other ways in which members of the public can provide feedback throughout the recommendation development process?
Yeah, I think the community listening sessions are envisioned as, individual or set events that individuals can come and engage with and offer their insights and perspectives and concerns to the county. Of course, all these meetings are open to the public too, so members of the public are free to attend any of these, ask questions, send emails and concerns. I think it would be wise to solicit and proactively solicit the feedback and input of stakeholders, particularly from underrepresented communities who, may not feel like these programs are always designed to allow their members to engage. And I think it would be wise to bring in policy experts and, experts in campaigning and reporting processes for you all to engage with. These are the tools that we have available. I'm sure there are other tools out there that I haven't named right now, but the committee has the ability to kind of like set guidelines for what it would like in terms of community participation. Other questions? Okay. If you don't mind, I'm going to run just a few minutes over, not long, but I just want to make sure we get to these critical next step questions here. But if you have to, I think Marshall had to jump off early. If you have to, totally understand. Okay, so continuing on. So we talked about before how there's going to be a phase 1 and phase 2 of the work. That's because there's no way that any committee could develop the entire policy in a matter of a few months. But there are some policies that are very time sensitive and need to be included in their recommendations to the county board. And there are some that can be evaluated after the county board processes the initial proposal. And so the first tier recommendation, so what I did was like, I took all of the questions and policies that you will likely be considering, and I kind of broke them out into first tier, second tier. All of these are important, but some are more time sensitive than others. So the first tier recommendations will include things like, what kind of oversight is there? What are the contribution limits? How much in matching funds will be distributed to candidates? What are the restrictions on, contributions? And what are the reporting requirements? So, and like, what do candidates need to do to qualify? And so these are some of the initial questions you all will be evaluating in the next few weeks. And then the second tier are things that can be evaluated after the policy is, after whatever policy is passed by the county board. And so these are a little bit more in the weeds. Again, they're important, they're just not as time sensitive. And so like, who can file a complaint? What is the fair market value formula that is used when for thinking through in-kind donations? How do candidates transfer money from previous accounts if they ran for office before? So, one thing to think about is how to best manage all of these questions. And I would strongly suggest considering a subcommittee model where, somewhere between 2 and 4 members, join different subcommittees that take on a broad number of subjects. So like one subcommittee could be like in-kind donations because that is a complex topic, or one subcommittee could be, the oversight question about budgeting, and community engagement could be another subcommittee too. That would allow, if you have multiple subcommittees evaluating each topic and then reporting back to the oversight commission or oversight committee, that would allow for a greater quantity of work to be done simultaneously. It'd be more efficient for everyone's time. It'd be a little more inclusive because it would allow for every member of this committee to be able to engage and become an expert on a different policy topic too. Instead of when you hold all the meetings, when you hold when you hold just a couple big meetings, that means 1 or 2 voices tend to dominate the conversation. And so, I think having a subcommittee process does make a lot of sense and allows for a lot more scheduling variety because not everyone can make the full committee meeting. But if you have small subcommittees of 2 to 4 members, you can schedule those periodically at those members to fit in line with their scheduling needs. So you could have meetings on like Tuesday mornings and Wednesday evenings just to accommodate too. So you have a little bit more flexibility in the scheduling of subcommittees. But that's a discussion for you all to consider. That's just my personal advice. So looking at the next meeting time, I'm actually gonna I think I'm gonna stop. Well, yeah. So looking at the next meeting time here, the most common doodle choice in the doodle poll was that comes next would be January 6th. Monday we have 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. We have 8 people having chose that. One of them is me, so you just take one off of them. So that 7 individuals can make the January 6th meeting at 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And then after the following time would be January 8th, which is 6 to 8 p.m.
Hey Daniel, is there a reason
Yeah.
why the only times offered were Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday between 6 and 8?
I did work some initial morning or afternoon meetings in, and I can work some options into the meeting times for December or for January if you have specific like afternoon times you want me to incorporate in. So are there so why don't after this I'm gonna follow up with an email and just respond if you have certain like afternoon or morning times you want me to
I
incorporate
would say
in?
just in general, 9 to 5 hours are easier. Looking for those of us with kids. And I would say if we can include some Thursdays and Fridays, because I don't know about anybody else, but my week tends to be loaded with meetings during the first part of the week and then eases off later in the week.
Okay. Well, I'll follow up an email and I'll put that request in, but I do hear what you're saying, Kari.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's anything really meaningfully different between 6 to 8 on a Wednesday and 6:30 to 8:30 on a Wednesday.
Mhm. Okay. Well, while we're on the line now, why don't we set the meeting for the first week of January? And that'll be the meeting where we do the ethics training, and that'll be the meeting where hopefully most members can join. And so then we would be able to, the IEC would be able to make considerations around like how it wants to schedule future meetings, what it wants to do about subcommittees, whether it wants to elect a chair. So why don't we set that first meeting? Now, since we have everyone on the line, trying to think about the best way to do this. So I'm going to ask, since we have the most times already set up now, do folks have a strong preference between January 6th, Monday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., and January 8th, Wednesday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.? These are the two most commonly selected. I'm sorry, January 6th, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. has 7 members. And January 8th, 6 to 8 p.m. has 7 members as well. Again, that would not represent every meeting we would have from here on out. I'm just asking for the first meeting we have in January since we're all on the phone. Do people have a strong choice between January 6th, 6:30 to 8:30, or January 8th, 6 to 8 p.m.?
I personally prefer Wednesday.
Okay, we have a choice for Wednesday. Got it.
Don't tell me, and I'm traveling both of those days.
Okay, thanks, Kari. Becca, you have your hand raised.
I think that was before, and I have no preference.
Okay, great. Other folks on this meeting, preference between Wednesday and Monday?
Wednesday would.
Dwight put in the chat that Wednesday is great for him. Just flagging that.
Okay, thank you, Dwight. No preference from Beth? Well, since almost no one has a preference, but we do have one preference recorded, why don't we just do that meeting for Wednesday? So let's hold her for Wednesday, January 8th, 6 to 8 p.m. Again, I'll follow up with like a calendar invite, and we will of course have more details, but set January 8th, Wednesday, 6 p.m. for our next meeting. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for sitting through it and absorbing this. I know it's a lot to consider and weigh. And we'll work through each of these questions methodically too. But does anyone have any final thoughts, any final concerns or questions they have? Okay. Well, you have my personal contact information, and my signature includes both my phone number and of course my email. So feel free to follow up if you have any other questions or things you want me to bring to our next meeting. And thank you so much for participating and joining. We're thrilled to have your diversity of experiences and perspectives, and I think it'll make it a very strong committee that will have a lot of thoughtful conversations. So with that, I'll say have a wonderful holiday and get some rest, and then I will see you Wednesday, January 8th at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.